Good morning. I want to thank SDOT for coming and joining us this morning with another of what will be regular updates to the council. I know the future of the West Seattle Bridge is one, the concerns about the future of the bridge are concerns that my colleagues share. I want to also thank SDOT for the time that they spent with Councilmember Peterson and I last week to a visit of the bridge that helped us visualize some of the problems, in particular, the problem of the locked bearing. In sort of big picture, my concerns are, of course, always first and foremost safety, but also I feel that we really need to stay laser focused on the need to maximize mobility for West Seattle residents. We often joke that West Seattle, which is a peninsula, feels more like an island sometimes, and that has never been more true than now. And I really hope that Councilmember Peterson, with his chairing of the Transportation Committee, and my efforts as the representative representing District 1 and West Seattle residents, that we can bring a real sense of urgency to the need to identify both not just real-time traffic mobility plans for this moment, but also as we move into next stages, and also work together to come up with a plan that represents the best thought out options as it relates to budget and mobility. The presentation that we're going to hear from SDOT is going to cover the issues related to safety prioritization, the future of the bridge, stabilization and shoring, the schedule for both of those things, the creation of a technical advisory panel, the need, again, as I mentioned earlier, for traffic mitigation, both as it relates to the Low Bridge, to the Detour routes, and to transit. And then finally, the budget for the elements that we are planning moving forward and beyond. I also want to announce that this Wednesday from 5 to 6:30, we are going to have a District 1 town hall. Presenters from SDOT are being confirmed, and Brian Callahan has graciously agreed to moderate. And with that, turn it over to Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Councilmember Herbold. Thank you, Council President Gonzalez. Good morning, everybody. Just want to reinforce what Councilmember Herbold was saying, that we'll be really focused on safety, urgency, mobility, with a general oversight role that we have as the City Council. And this also brings up the importance in terms of mobility and transportation options for residents of West Seattle that are having a really tough time right now because of this closure. Just so you know, top of mind for me is renewing the Seattle Transportation Benefit District so that we can provide additional bus service to West Seattle residents. We'll talk more about that in the coming weeks, but I intend to work very closely with Councilmember Herbold, support her leadership for her constituents, and also work closely with Seattle Department of Transportation, and very happy that they're here to give us another report. We really appreciate this frequent communication with them and their transparency. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, council members. Really appreciate that. We're going to hear now from the Seattle Department of Transportation. I imagine that Director Zimbabwe is going to kick us off. Again, colleagues, as a reminder, if you have questions, you can use the chat function to just tell me that you have a question. And if you, using the chat function, can let me know at what point you want to ask the question, that would be helpful. However, do not use the chat function for anything that is substantive. In other words, don't put your questions in the chat function. Just use it for the transitory purpose of letting me know that you're raising your hand. And then Councilmember Juarez, since you are not online, if you have a question, just feel free to ping me on my phone and let me know that you have a question. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Director Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Council President Gonzalez. And I'll say that I'm going to walk through most of the presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Heather Marx, who's joined me as well, to talk about some of the mitigation aspects that we're putting in place now. So let me just start by saying there's never a good time to close a bridge. And I just want to briefly thank everyone at SDOT who, in the midst of the public health crisis that we are in the middle of, continued to be out there taking the safety of the traveling public first in mind, and identified accelerating cracking of the West Seattle Bridge. And that led us to the difficult decision to close it back on March 23rd. We know that this has been a major impact to people throughout Seattle, but particularly those in West Seattle. And I just want to say, as we start this presentation, as we continue to be clear and transparent in our communications, that we and I share your frustration about where we are right now. And I am a West Seattle resident myself. Many other people throughout SDOT are West Seattle residents, and we feel this closure ourselves personally, but we also feel it professionally. And we know that this is something that is adding stress and frustration to people at an already difficult time for all of us. So I just want to make very clear as we go through what is still very challenging information and a lot of things where we still need more information to be able to provide the public with clarity on where things will go from here. Please know that everybody at SDOT, the mayor, all of our partners at all levels of government will continue to work together to identify the best possible path forward and to mitigate the impacts of this closure on the way there. So I know we only have about half an hour left. I will go through quickly a presentation, and we can go on to the next slide, just showing Councilmember Herbold laid out exactly what we'll be talking about. But just what has changed in the last few weeks, where we are in the process, and then where we are going a little bit. So I will jump into just the background, what has changed. And I know that some people are sort of joining this process a little bit down the line. We were here a week after we closed the bridge on March 30th, talking with you. We're now back a few weeks later, giving some updates. But when we presented on March 30th, we talked a lot about what got us here. We also have been updating and continue to update our dedicated website to the bridge, and that's www.seattle.gov/transportation/West Seattle Bridge, all one word. And if people are just catching up, there's a lot of information there that I would encourage people to go and take a look at. We want to be very clear that during our frequent inspections of the West Seattle Bridge, there was no indication that the bridge was unsafe for ordinary use or that preventative maintenance plans would impact the normal use of the bridge until very, very recently. And that really started and accelerated over the course of February and March. And we've been inspecting the bridge every year since 2013, and that it really wasn't clear until very, very recently that it would impact the normal use of the bridge and do so in such a dramatic way. We can move on to the next slide, and just to reiterate, and I think we've all said it so far, that safety remains our number one priority. We have it is still our assessment, and we've seen cracks continue to grow since we closed the bridge to live traffic load, but they have grown at a decelerating rate, or they have not continued to accelerate in the same way that we were seeing while there was still traffic on the bridge. It's still our assessment that the bridge is not at an imminent risk of failure, but we before anybody of SDOT goes up on the bridge, before we do daily inspections, we make sure that it is safe to continue to do so, and we also know that we need to plan for every contingency with this bridge. And so we are working now to model those potential cracking scenarios and preparing our contingency plans in the event that we do think that the bridge is at an imminent risk of failure. We know how we will proceed in an orderly fashion. We're also installing and have crews up on the bridge right now, intelligent monitoring systems that can track the bridge in real time. We've been inspecting the bridge every day in person, but that is a moment in time, and we started last week, and over the course of the next few weeks, we will be installing sensors throughout the bridge that help us understand in real time what is happening, provide a lot more information into what is going on with the deterioration of the bridge, and that both informs our emergency planning, but also our future planning, and helps us have the information necessary to know what type of repair is possible, and whether the bridge is deteriorating more quickly than we think right now. Our safety management is based on a worst case scenario. So we will always plan for the worst case, hoping that we don't get there, but being prepared in the event that we do. And we continue, and the information that we're going to get from the real-time monitoring systems will help us understand and then have as much lead time as possible if things start to go in a towards failure. Part of that is also outreach to other local stakeholders, the port, the Coast Guard, adjacent property owners. That is also beginning now, understanding what potential failure scenarios would look like and how we keep the public safe overall. We can move on. And I want to reiterate again that the future of the bridge right now remains uncertain.
Okay, hold on a minute.
Okay.
Councilmember has a question.
Thank you. I just want to, I think it's less of a question and more of a raising of an issue. I appreciate Director Zimbabwe, again, the focus on safety and the development of plans, contingency plans to address the worst case scenario of bridge collapse. One of the messages that you sent out over the weekend relates specifically to the plans that you are developing in case areas around the high bridge become off limits. And you say in that email that you're prepared to remove traffic from the low bridge and surrounding areas underneath the bridge for some period of time in the event that the high ridge bridge becomes unstable. Of course, as you rightly know, this affects everybody traveling on and around the bridges, those who live and work near the structures, and our teams who work on the bridge itself. Appreciate that this is a necessary part of contingency planning. I want to also flag that I really appreciate that Chief Scoggins will be delivering a report on first responder capability to address fire needs in this time. And I just want to flag that I think it's really important that the impacts on Fire Station 36, which is at near the bridge at Delridge, be a part of this contingency planning as well, should there be a need in a worst case scenario to close the lower level bridge.
Absolutely. I think those are great points, and Chief Scoggins and I are in regular conversation about the bridge and about our work on it, and we have already started talking about what some of those challenges are that they face. And the fire department is highly involved in our contingency planning, and there's both not only for the area immediately around the bridge, but some of the other detour routes and areas where that'll see some increased traffic as a result of the high bridge closure. Also impact other stations beyond just 36, but that is very, very close, very, very tightly being coordinated between SDOT and fire.
And I appreciate that. I'm adding a request that I understand, because I've had communications with Chief Scoggins, that they are doing that work as it relates to the current situation on the ground, and doing an assessment of the fire department's ability to address emergencies. What I'm asking is that work also be done as it relates to this worst case scenario if the bridge closes.
Yes,
The lower level bridge closes.
Yep, it is. And we will continue to do that. So I think we were just starting on the future of the bridge remaining uncertain, and I think this is a really important point here. And again, we've made it very clear that we're committed to consistent communication, even when we don't have all the information we need to provide the full range of answers that people are looking for. We do not yet know if the repair of the bridge is feasible from a technical or a financial perspective. If the repair is feasible, we think it could provide up to 10 years of additional life to the bridge. But in either case, we think we need to replace the West Seattle high-rise bridge much sooner than anticipated when it was opened in 1984. And then this was information that we shared last week, but we think it's very important to reiterate. We don't anticipate traffic returning to the bridge in 2020 or 2021 at this point. There's a few stages of what it will take to extend the life of the bridge and bring traffic back onto the bridge. And I want to talk a little bit about each of those because I think it's important for the public to understand the complexity of some of this work, but also what we are doing over the course of the next weeks, months, and next couple of years. So no matter what is decided about the future of the West Seattle High Bridge, shoring and stabilization of the bridge have to happen to preserve the integrity of the bridge and protect public safety. We need to address the continued growth of cracks, and those cracks have continued to grow even after we have removed vehicle live load from the bridge, and stabilize it to provide us the opportunity to make good decisions. None of the work that we are doing now precludes any choice that we make in terms of how we think about the future of the bridge. But for public safety purposes, we need to continue with stabilization and shoring of the bridge. So right now, I mentioned we've been doing we continue field inspection. We're installing that the instrumentation hardware provides us real-time monitoring and alerts. Immediately, we are working on something that I'll talk about in a second about the release of the tension in a bearing at Pier 18, and we'll talk a little bit about exactly what that means. Then we'll begin on repair of shoring and repair, and bring together, as Councilmember Herbold said earlier, a technical advisory panel for peer review, some outside experts on the technical side that can help all of us understand what is going on and think through the best ways to move forward. And then, assuming that we are on the path that we currently are on, later this summer we would begin address the bearing issue at Pier 18 and begin procurement of shoring materials. We anticipate that to be some long lead time items. And then after that, and everything that we're talking about here is through the shoring period. At the same time as we are doing some more of the shoring work, we'll have a better understanding of what repair is possible, what our pathway towards repair would look like, but also be considering what the long-term future of the bridge is and whether early replacement is a more prudent path.
Great. Before you move on, Director Zimbabwe, Councilmember Herbold has a question about slide 6.
You're still on mute, Councilmember.
Mute, Councilmember.
What I hear you saying, Director, is that all of the items on this schedule up through early spring 2021 must be completed regardless of whether or not we are going to repair this bridge or rebuild it. Is that correct?
That is correct. I think we need to move on the pathway that all of these things need to happen at the same time as we are doing some of the design work around shoring and design this spring. We will have a better understanding of whether and if repair is possible, and understand also be thinking about what our long-term future is, and whether early replacement, whether passing over a repair step, and just thinking about replacement is a more prudent path. So this is not a fixed set of activities. It will continue to evolve, but this is our current best thinking about how we bring vehicular traffic back to the bridge in the shortest possible time frame.
Thank you. So spring for having a better idea of whether or not repair or replacement is the path. Although it sounds to me like you are still saying that we need to deal with the locked bearing and the shoring, it's the activities beyond that as it relates to repair that are in question. And the reason why I raise this is I'm really surprised at the number of constituents who have been contacting me and saying, don't spend the $33 million, let's move towards rebuilding the bridge now. But what I hear you say is that we have to spend that $33 million either way.
I think so. This is a very complicated set of issues and decisions that I don't think we want to rush into.
I'm sorry, do we have to do the shoring construction or not?
We have to make sure that the bridge is stable and it's a public safety issue. So we will do everything that we need to do to make sure that the bridge is stable. If we determine as we go through that process that it is not technically feasible or financially feasible to stabilize the bridge or to repair the bridge, we can evolve that thinking about where we go and what we do. I also want to be very clear, we do not have, and the budget that we'll talk about towards the end of this presentation does not currently anticipate any demolition of the bridge. And so if we were to go in a path where we didn't do stabilization of the bridge because we were working towards an early replacement, there are a lot of potential budgetary implications of going in a different path. We are currently showing what our best path forward is right now to bring traffic back to the bridge as soon as possible. But those are as we have more information, we will update that thinking and update the public and the council about what those decisions are.
Thank you.
Okay, I know we are starting to run a little bit low on time. I would like to I will try to go through as quickly as I can some of the technical information, and I think it is important for people to understand a little bit about the condition of the bridge, because I have heard some of the same concerns about why we are doing the work now to stabilize it. I think some of what we can talk about helps explain that. Like I said, our first step is to slow or halt the bridge deterioration, and there's more information here. We still see cracks growing. I'm going to move on to talking about one thing that we think is affecting the condition of the bridge, which is on slide 8, and that is a lateral bearing that is on the east side of the bridge. And the bridge has 4 sets of columns that carry 3 spans. And this is at the eastern side that we have a lateral bearing that is a piece of the bridge that sits between the roadway and the support piers, the columns that hold up the bridge, and it allows the bridge to move in response to thermal expansion, to traffic, to normal changes in concrete called creep and shrinkage over the course of time. And what we've seen is that one of the bearings, and there's a picture here on the slide of, is compressed and is bulging out and is creating additional pressure that affects the whole of the bridge. So our first step here is to unlock that pressure that's on the bridge. And this column, and Pier's cap is Pier 18. And that is on the eastern side, as I mentioned, of the 4 sets of columns and piers, the pieces of the bridge that sit on top of the columns. And this is on the east side of the Duwamish. The 2 piers in the center, 16 and 17, are the ones that hold the high span, the center piece of the high span. And where we've seen cracking primarily on the high bridge is in the middle of that, where we have area C on this slide. But it's some of that tension seems to be generated through the bearing that's in Pier 18. So our first step is to replace that bearing, and that in and of itself, we need to make sure the bridge is stable enough to do that. That involves jacking the bridge up slightly so that the pier can be, the bearing can be replaced, and that is some technically challenging work that needs to be done. Piers 18 and 15 are the 2 pieces that also connect the high bridge to the rest of the structure, the sort of viaduct structure that goes along Spokane on the east side, and the West Seattle Freeway, Fauntleroy Expressway that goes up to Fauntleroy on the west side. So these are still important pieces of the bridge, and they're where the load is transferred and form part of the unit that also supports that center span area as well. Once that work is done, then we will begin the process of shoring the bridge to further stabilize it. And again, I'll just reiterate, we're still at the very early stages of this, working to gather more information. That's why we have more instrumentation being installed here to be able to answer these questions about whether and how we think about proceeding. This is our current best understanding and best case scenario of how we work on the bridge. Shoring means adding temporary support that preserves the integrity of the bridge, and we think that by the middle of this year, we should be able to design how this would work and procure the materials for how to make these stabilization repairs to the whole of the bridge, and begin those repairs later this year. Once we have that shoring in place, we would begin the process of repair construction. I want to also make sure that we're again clear that there are a lot of elements of uncertainty here. And this goes to Councilmember Herbold's questions about whether stabilization, whether and how we think about stabilization. But we need to make sure the bridge can be stabilized before it makes further repair infeasible. We don't know yet whether repair will require permits that impact on the navigation channel. We need to design the process of how to do the construction, and we don't know exactly what special fabrication or equipment shoring and repair will require, and whether there are what the lead times on those are, and we don't still know whether repair is feasible technically or financially. And again, we share everyone's frustration and concern about not knowing all the information that we need to know at this point. And I can assure everybody that we are working as quickly as we can to be able to answer these questions. We still don't know whether repair is possible. We are at very early stages. We're at 0% of design, and each step will impact what is feasible and how long it will take. And again, we think that if repair is possible, it could add another 10 years of life to the bridge. But there's a lot that is still unknown. We don't know whether, that 10 years is sort of a guideline. The details of how we think about stabilization and repair will affect that additional life that we could provide for the bridge. briefly, and then I'll turn it over to Heather a little bit to talk about what we're doing from a non-bridge perspective to mitigate impacts on the surrounding community. As part of this is a very complicated bridge. We have a great team of experts at SDOT and as part of our design team, but we think that there's additional expertise that we can bring to bear from a technical perspective that can help make sure that we are looking down every possible avenue for how to think about stabilization, repair, replacement of the bridge that can help us and help inform both our own and the public's understanding of where we go with the bridge. So we're working to get a technical advisory panel formed that will be made up of experts from across the country, focused on bridge design, geotechnical expertise, maritime work, all aspects of what the structural aspects of the bridge will take that can help continue to inform our thinking going forward. So with that, I will turn it over to Heather Marx to talk a little bit about where we are on traffic mitigations.
Before you do that, Director Zimbabwe, Councilmember Herbold has another question about slide 13. Thank you.
Yes, real quickly, as it relates to the technical advisory panel and the scope of their advisory authority, are they going to be making recommendations about whether or not it makes sense to proceed with shoring and or with repair? Just trying to figure out where their advice is going to be sought, at what stage, and what we can expect there.
Sure. So we have not sent out invitations to the technical advisory panel as of now. I think some of that scope of exactly where they will be providing input is to be determined. I think in our sense is really additional expertise that can help us make sure that we are looking down every possible avenue. I don't anticipate that they will have I think there'll be more of a sounding board than a recommending body, but really giving us. I think we'd rather have them be able to give us input, advice, give us ideas of creative solutions, make sure that if we're thinking of every possible challenge or issue that we need to be thinking of early, so that we don't go down a pathway that then we realize is not sustainable or feasible.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Sam. And I am Heather Marx, and I work at SDOT normally as the Director of Downtown Mobility. So also, I just want to note that I live in West Seattle, so I'm intimately familiar with the difficulties that this closure is causing. Closing the West Seattle High Bridge has a similar level of complexity as closing the viaduct. It's similar levels of traffic each and every day. But with a lot fewer reroute choices, and we have had a lot less time to plan. Right now, the low bridge is restricted to people who are driving emergency vehicles, freight, and public transit, as well as folks who are riding their bike or walking along the public path. Seattle Police Department is helping with our enforcement. Anybody who needs to get to Harbor Island can access that through across the East Channel Bridge, so approaching Harbor Island from the east. I think we can move on to the next slide, please. As I think we've mentioned a few times, we have installed a signal at Highland Parkway and Holden to help mitigate some of the issues of using Highland Parkway as a detour. We've also added detour route signage to the First Avenue Bridge, and we've improved that. We're improving all of those detour signages continually as we receive input and see how things are working. The signals at the 5-way intersection down near Terminal 5 have been connected to our citywide system so that we can adjust signal timing as needed remotely. In addition, next weekend, we're going to repave that intersection and add some additional amenities so that it operates a little bit better. Just for the public's knowledge, when we repave that intersection next weekend, it's going to limit access. So people should plan around that. In addition, we have plans to fix potholes, smooth stripe, and sign the alternative routes so that those alternatives can operate as well as they can. In addition, we're identifying more measures. It's important to note, I think, here that the current detour and alternate routes cannot support the level of traffic that we had before the stay-at-home order. And so as we continue to communicate with the public, we are going to help folks understand that we really do need to change some ways about how we get in and out of West Seattle. And to that end, we are working with our partners at King County Metro to keep buses moving in and out of Seattle as quickly as possible.
Heather,
Yeah.
Interrupt you, please. Can you go back to the previous slide 15? Councilmember Herbold wanted to ask a quick question about this slide.
Hi.
Thank you. And this is this I think is both slide 14 and 15 as it relates to the lower level bridge, understanding that bridge cannot support all of the traffic, even with these reduced traffic volumes that used to be held by the West Seattle Bridge. The high numbers that the lower level bridge was carrying was around 16,000. The last set of numbers I have from April 8th and 9th, and that was right when SPD, I think the 8th is the day before SPD started enforcement, and the 9th they began sort of an educational enforcement, and that was 8,000. I'd really like to know, that was nearly 2 weeks ago now, I'd like to know what the traffic counts are on the lower bridge now that there's been some sustained enforcement by SPD.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Herbold. We are seeing those same numbers, but observationally, we also see that as the police department is out there enforcing, generally during the peak times, they slide it around a little bit to keep it real. But when there isn't enforcement, the violations of that request are substantial. And so we really need to impress upon people the importance of keeping that bridge open and available, particularly for emergency services, particularly during this public health crisis. So folks who are using the low bridge, please, I understand, believe me, I understand how inconvenient this is, but please do consider using alternative routes at all times, because we need to make sure that ambulances can get in and out of the peninsula.
Yeah, and I would say it's stronger. Don't just consider using alternative routes. Don't use the lower level bridge, right?
Right.
You can get a ticket right now.
You can.
And,
You certainly can.
I have committed to continuing to advocate for some relaxation of those restrictions for emergency workers and for off time commutes, like at night. But I can only do so if you guys at SDOT see drastically reduced volumes of traffic on the lower level bridge. So if anybody's folks listening, stop using the lower level bridge.
You can be more direct. You can be more direct than I can. Yes, stop it. It's not helping.
Thank you so much for that line of questioning. I do think it's important to remind folks to that it's not just a soft suggestion to avoid using the low bridge. It is absolute need to avoid using the lower bridge. And while we appreciate that creates an inconvenience, I am also a West Seattle resident. I think we have a very strong quorum just on this Zoom call of West Seattleites. But I do think it's important for us to, for the sake of the integrity of our citywide public safety system and for the public safety system as a whole of District 1, to make sure that folks stay off the low bridge until we're able to come up with some safer alternatives for, as Councilmember Herbold has described, perhaps some categories of exemptions for certain individuals. But I want to echo the forcefulness of Councilmember Herbold's point around avoiding the use of the low bridge until further notice. I know that Councilmember Mosqueda also has a question or comment on this slide, so I will cede the floor to her.
Thank you, Council President. I want to again thank Director Zimbabwe. I know you and I had a chance to chat briefly, but it does seem like there has been a dramatic reduction in the flow of traffic down there. As folks may know, I live just around the corner, so this is part of my walking route and running route to go on the lower bridge often. And just seeing it even this morning, the police officers who are down there redirecting traffic is greatly appreciated, and I could see commerce and emergency vehicles moving freely. So that's really appreciated and a drastic difference from 2 Mondays ago. I do want to just put a pin or ping you all again about where we are at in considering whether or not healthcare providers and human services providers, like folks who work at DESC, might be able to get a special okay to go on that lower bridge. And perhaps that weaves into Councilmember Herbold's comment about needing to see a reduction in individuals trying to get on that bridge. I noticed that the signage to get onto the lower bridge now says "do not enter" for bus and commerce vehicles only, which I think is a direct sign and a direct mandate to people to not get onto that lower bridge. But can you remind us of what the process is and the time frame for allowing healthcare providers and homeless services or human service providers to have an acceptance to go on that bridge?
So thank you very much, council members. I do appreciate your support as we try to minimize traffic on the low bridge. We are working closely right now with the Port of Seattle and businesses that, essential businesses that operate down in the vicinity of the low bridge, and trying to ascertain whether or not there are time periods when we can relax our restrictions. The difficulty is, of course, one of numbers. So as we relax restrictions, it becomes more and more difficult to explain why this kind of worker is more essential than that kind of worker. And I think one of the things that we've learned from this public health crisis is that we got a lot of essential people. And so we are actively engaged in those conversations, Councilmember Mosqueda. And I think one of the difficulties for healthcare workers and for human services workers is just figuring out the numbers, because we do have actual real limitations about how much traffic that low bridge can handle. We can identify, to the extent that we can identify workers and sort of do the arithmetic to figure out how many we can fit. That's one thing, but just trying to speculate about who in West Seattle is a doctor, a nurse, or a social worker is a difficult calculus.
That makes sense. Council President, one quick follow-up.
Sure. I just want to make note of the time as well. It is 10:22 a.m. and we're going to have a rather robust conversation in terms of committee reports related to full council this afternoon. So I'm going to encourage us to move along after Councilmember Mosqueda's question so that we can avoid being here until close to 1. Go ahead, Councilmember Mosqueda.
Thank you so much. And thanks Heather and Director Zimbabwe for that report back. Appreciate the updates as you consider what the numbers may or may not be. Just a quick PSA though, I want to remind folks, and please tell me if you heard otherwise or if I'm incorrect, there is no document that essential workers need to have on them at this point. We have heard reports, and I will be following up with Chief Best and Councilmember Herbold as chair of this Public Safety Committee, and Council President Gonzalez as well. We have heard reports of police officers pulling people over and asking for their essential worker permit. And we want to make sure that that is not something that people are being asked for. And I don't think that it relates to the lower bridge, as people have been pulled over there for incorrectly accessing that bridge. But as you consider whether or not we can have healthcare providers and others access that lower bridge, we would love to work with you all about what kind of documentation that may or may not be, because I don't want that to be used as an excuse for folks to get pulled over. So on that front, we'll be following up with more information, but that was just a quick PSA. There is not a document needed, correct?
So let me, this is a very good question. And there is a very small number of ILWU workers who are dispatched from their union hall on East Marginal Way. And because of the speed with which they have to arrive at Terminal 5, they are allowed right now, and I know that this is problematic, so we're going to move through that for just a second. They have it's more of a placard that just says that they're an ILWU worker who's been dispatched and headed for Terminal 5. SDOT shares your concern, both direct and indirect, about requiring people to have any kind of pass, and not just for human rights reasons, but also because there's no place to pull people over and check. So right now, it's just a tiny number of ILWU workers who are using that. It's not a pass; it's a placard that should indicate to policemen at a glance that they are authorized to use the bridge. Does that clarify? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome. Let me just say that we're working with King County Metro very thoroughly. So just in the interest of time, I'll hand it back to Sam so that he can talk about our order of magnitude budget.
Yeah, and I'll just I'll reiterate that we're working with all sorts of transit partners on developing contingency plans, and transit has been one of the places that the public health crisis has also hit the hardest in terms of making day-to-day decisions based on the health of their workforce, and made it very challenging, I think, to think about it, even how we move into recovery and how we move forward from transit throughout the region, knowing that it is still essential to our success as a city and as a region. But some of those plans will continue to emerge as we work with our partners at a time when they're also really trying to manage the day-to-day as well. So we did want to spend a very brief time on what our order of magnitude budget is through shoring, especially Councilmember Herbold, and hearing the questions that you've gotten and that we've gotten about, is this money worth it? And I want to say that this dollar figure that we are showing here is still very early in our understanding of exactly what needs to be done through stabilization and repair and potential replacement as well. And some of these costs, so the costs related to shoring construction as we know it now, is on the order of $15 million there. So most of the other costs here that we're showing in terms of order of magnitude costs are need to be done sort of regardless of what our path forward is. We think still that shoring is necessary, and certainly necessary on the repair pathway. But there's both the installation of monitoring equipment, the design of our approach going forward structurally, the construction work related to Pier 18, but then also some of what we've talked about in terms of traffic control mitigation, our communications efforts, and then something I think we want to highlight too is our need to continue to take care and in some places accelerate the maintenance of the swing bridge to make sure it remains a viable and robust transportation asset as well. So those figures are our again, order of magnitude estimates of what our program is sort of over the next year or so. The repair line is TBD, and that is a place where as we continue to have more information about the condition of the bridge and our path forward, we'll continue to update these figures and these estimates, and again, our commitment and our approach is to have regular, clear, and transparent communication, and that means that as our understanding changes, we will be sharing that with you and with the public as a whole. And so, just to talk a little bit about what we're doing to continue to bring the community together, we are working. We've worked to share email updates with over 1,000 people that have already signed up for our email updates. We continue to post information on that website I mentioned earlier that update people as we have more information, as we do activities. We're working with DON, Office of Economic Development, make sure that we're communicating from a neighborhood, a community perspective, also from a business perspective as well. So we know there's a lot more work here. Councilmember Herbold, you mentioned the town hall on Wednesday evening. Heather and I will be joining you there as well. So we are very, very committed to clear, consistent, and transparent communication throughout the life of this project. And with that, I'll stop. I know we've had a lot of discussion. I'm happy to answer any other questions or take any other feedback you've got.
Thank you, Director Zimbabwe and Heather. Really appreciate your willingness to be with us this morning, almost exactly 4 weeks after our first briefing in council briefing. Kind of hard to believe that it's been 4 weeks already. I want to thank you for your ongoing cooperation with us as a council, and certainly with your continued endeavor to be transparent and direct as possible with the public and folks who use the West Seattle Bridge, whether they're residents or workers of District 1. I have really appreciated your all's willingness to give us weekly reports on the work that you all are doing on this important infrastructure issue, and have really appreciated the leadership of our transportation chair, Councilmember Peterson, and District 1 Representative Councilmember Herbold, in making sure that this issue stays on the front burner, and that we are asking all of the appropriate questions to make sure that we understand not just the what's at stake, but also what some mitigation strategies are or can be in order to adequately meet the needs of folks who need to get in and out of West Seattle. So appreciate that. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues before we close this portion of the agenda out? Great. Seeing none, of course, SDOT and the good folks over at SDOT are always available to us offline. So I strongly encourage any of you who have additional questions or concerns